Thanks for joining our virtual session.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to start with if whoever's comfortable would be willing to share their name and maybe if they're thinking about transferring, where they are transferring to, just like a quick introduction. So I'll start. My name's Bree, and I went to SDSU for grad school. So while I was there, I was able to work on the WPA, helping people understand their scores and kind of an advisor to people on the WPA. So that's kind of what brings me here to help you all. But would anyone else like to introduce themselves?
That's interesting. I am a student in ELAC 145, so I'm trying to improve my English and the writing skills before I move on in my professional career, as well to think to have another degree, higher degree, master degree in the future. So I think this workshop is interesting. I want to learn more about it, and I'm ready.
Okay, what kind of degree are you thinking of pursuing?
Actually, I'm architect.
Oh, wow.
And I have master degree, but from my country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I will work in construction project management, or I will go to the PhD. I'm between academic or or real life professional degree. So yeah, but the both attracted me.
Wow, that's amazing. Architecture, that is, I've always been super fascinated by that. So that's awesome. And I'm glad you're here kind of just trying to reach your goals. And I'm super happy that I'll get to help you with some of that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves?
Hi, my name is Noah. I'm hoping to I am going to be transferring to SDSU next fall. So.
Oh, congratulations. What do you want to study there?
I am going to be studying political science. So, yeah.
Wow.
Wow, good for you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
At least you have future in this market.
Well, thank you two for introducing yourselves. Would anyone else, I'll give another shot. Anyone else want to introduce themselves before we begin?
Yeah, I will go next. So this is Wally.
Hi.
Hi. And I'm a political science major. To be honest, I have already transferred to UC San Diego for this fall, but still I'm here to learn more maybe. This is extra credit opportunity as well. But I will be following up.
Awesome. Well, congratulations to you in getting to UCSD. And we'll definitely be touching on some differences between SDSU and UCSD when it comes to the writing placement assessment. So it'll be nice. I'm glad we have a varied audience here, and also two political science majors. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to go over the WPA. We're going to kind of get a little bit familiar with the prompt, what it is, and what it's kind of getting at. So I'm just going to share my screen with my presentation real quick. So I think I should be able to present this. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So welcome to Tips to Transfer. This is a workshop on navigating the writing placement exams. That's what the WPA stands for, is the writing placement assessment. So I should have written assessment instead of exam. But first, I should explain what are these exams. Again, they're more of assessments than exams. They're not testing you, they're assessing where you're at. So these assessments are meant to gauge where you're at in your writing, so you don't get placed in a class that is either too easy or too challenging for you, because there's a variety of classes. So what they look like is a writing prompt and a sample reading. And This is specifically for San Diego State because I'll get to it, but most of this information is modeled off of San Diego State's writing placement assessment. Again, it's not a test or a quiz, and the other thing to keep in mind is this isn't something that they want you to study super, super hard for. This is something that you've been preparing for in your English classes and your writing classes. So don't feel like it's a whole nother exam. They're just trying to see where you're at. So now we'll get into the difference between SDSU and UCSD. SDSU does require the WPA for transfer students. UCSD does not. This is a quote taken from their website. You have completed 2 UC transferable English compositions courses prior to your transfer, so you have met the ELWR, which is the English language writing requirement, and do not need to take the AWPE, which stands for Advanced Writing Placement Exam. So there's a lot of acronyms, but main point to understand here is that SDSU requires it, UCSD does not. So how is it assessed? And also at any point, if you would like to ask a question, just make sure you turn off your mic and pop on and I'm happy to clarify anything. So how it's graded is that at SDSU, you'll have 2 graders, and I've been in these grading rooms before, and the graders will not see each other's score and they'll give it a 1 through a 5. If they land on the same number, if they agree, they both give it a 5, for instance, then that's it. Then that would be the score. The score would be 5. If one person gives it a 4 and one person gives it a 5, then that is called a split score, meaning that they need a third reader to grade it. And generally that third reader is going to grade it pretty close to the other graders, because these people that are grading it are SDSU writing professors, and they all come together and like agree on what their criteria is. So it's not like some random, you know, like disjointed grading session. Like these people work together to make sure, you know, they're kind of looking out for the same things and that their grades are more or less pretty standard. So what they do is they'll take those 2 scores. Let's say you get 2 4s, that would combine to an 8. So that is actually what they're aiming for you to get. I worked with a lot of students who would come into the WPA office and say, oh, I didn't pass it, I got an 8. An 8 actually means you're writing at transfer level. That means you're writing at upper division level. It's where they actually want you to land. That's where they're expecting you to land. 6 or below, it doesn't mean you're not good at writing. It just means you might need some extra support. And so that means that you'll need to take 2 writing classes. So you'll take 1 writing class to kind of get you up to speed, and then the other writing class that would just be kind of your general upper division writing class. An 8, so you would just take that general writing class, just 1 writing class. And if you got a 10, which would mean you're writing at graduate level, you wouldn't have to take any writing classes unless your major requires it. So obviously, if you're an English major, it doesn't really matter if you get an 8 or a 10 because you're going to be writing regardless. But a lot of people want to get the 10, especially if they're a STEM major, and it's just really hard to give an exact formula for how to get that 10. So I'll go into that a little bit more. But any questions so far?
Okay. No, it's okay.
Yeah. No questions? Okay.
No.
Ina, did you have a question?
No, it's okay for now.
Okay, well, I'll give you guys another chance to pop in. So what we're looking for in the WPA is the biggest one is just strong writing abilities, having topic sentences, a thesis, using the text to support your answers. And then another big part of that would be the analysis, which is being able to address the aspects of the prompt, having that critical thinking, but not agreeing or disagreeing with the article. So it's not, I agree with this article because that's not really the argument they're looking for. They're looking for you to analyze the article itself. So we'll get into more examples of that. And then grammar only matters as long as your statements are clear. Like if the grammar is making it difficult to understand what your point is, then it matters, but it's not, they're not looking for semicolons and commas and over analyzing that. It's much more about the content. So on the day of the test, and we're going to go over the prompt soon, so I just kind of wanted to get some of the basics covered, and then we'll move on to the actual prompt. So on the day of the test, you want to read the prompt carefully and identify the writing tasks. We're going to get a head start on that today, so you'll already kind of be prepped because the prompt is always the same. The only thing that changes is the article. So you'll want to read the article / reading sample carefully before you begin, because you really want to understand what the author is saying. And then you want to outline and brainstorm before writing. So because it's a written exam, it's something you're not gonna have to write a lot of arrows or cross things out, erase things. You want to have a bit of an idea of like what structure you're going to be pursuing in your paper. This doesn't have to be like a perfect outline, but just generally what are the main topics you're going to cover. And then you don't want to waste time erasing. You just want to cross things out and draw arrows. The readers will make their best effort to read it the way you intended it to be read. As long as you can make it clear which parts go where, then they will try to read it in that order. It's a time test, so you don't want to spend a lot of time like making everything look perfect. You want to worry more about what you're writing. So I have a handout, but you don't have it physically, so I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to look at the prompt, and I know we can't really underline and circle, but I want you to look at the prompt and think about the main writing tasks, like what it's asking you to do. So let me just pull that up really quickly. Oh, I need to exit this. One sec. Okay. So here is what I would like you all to look at. So I might need to make this a little bit bigger. This is the part we're looking at. So this is the SDSU's writing placement exam prompt. So I'll read it aloud, and then I will give you all a minute to think about it, and we can talk together about what it's asking us to do. So identify and provide a brief explanation of the author's argument. Identify 2 persuasive strategies that the author uses to support his or her argument, and analyze how those strategies might persuade the reader to support the claim. Discuss the assumptions on which the argument is based, and evaluate the extent to which the reader would find the argument convincing. So I know there's a lot in there, but can anyone see, one thing that they're asking you to do? I see here that we have identify. So we're going to be naming things.
Provide explanation for the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, identify 2 persuasive strategy that the author uses to support. Interesting. Analyze how the student needed to claim. Discuss assumption on which argument is based.
Very good. Yeah. And the last one is evaluate. So we have quite a few verbs in here. We have identify, which is, to name something out. And this is with the author's argument. So I'm going to make it the same color. So identify and provide a brief explanation of the argument. So this is the argument. Here's what the author's saying. Then we have name 2 strategies that the author is using, and analyze those strategies.
So what's the difference between identify the persuasive strategy and analyze this?
So identifying would be saying one strategy the author uses is metaphors. That's naming it. I'm just naming what the strategy is and giving it a name. So that's identifying. Analyzing would be the metaphor that he uses is blank, and in explaining how that metaphor is working for his or her argument. So identify is naming, and analyze is more explaining and connecting it to the main argument.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. The other two verbs we see are discuss the assumptions, which really means to kind of just bring them up. They're not as, these are less important than the first two. So I would say, and this is a little too close to the original color, so let me change that. So we're looking at the author's argument, two strategies they use, and assumptions that they might have in their argument. And we'll get more into this, but assumptions are just things that the author is taking for granted about their audience. Mm-hmm. So you may have seen a comedy skit once, right? And maybe the comedian made a joke that you just really didn't find funny. Maybe it touched on something in your life that just wasn't funny. That would be an assumption that the comedian is making, right? He or she's assuming this is what people are going to find funny. And sometimes the comedian is right. Sometimes people are laughing. But then there's maybe 5 people not laughing. So why aren't they laughing? And what does that show us about the assumptions the comedian is making? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And the last part is really just a commentary. After you've done these things, you can end with, I'm going to keep the comedian example. You know, you could say the comedian was or was not effective at making the audience laugh for these reasons. So you can evaluate, kind of give them a good or bad, you know, Yelp review on, did they do what they set out to do?
So the evaluate, it's our opinion, like a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Write our thoughts. What do we think about all of this article?
Yes, you want to evaluate the article, but not based on whether you're convinced. You don't, it's not about, oh yes, I was convinced. It's more of looking at the big picture. In general, did they make good moves that would convince some people, right? Because not everyone's going to be convinced by an article, and there are bad articles out there. So they're not asking you to say, this is the best article ever, and they did such a good job convincing the audience, right? You can say, you know, they did a good job in this way, but they could have used more evidence. They could have been more serious or more funny, depending on the topic. So that's definitely where you give your opinion, but it's not based on if you agree or disagree.
Okay, so this is the last paragraph?
Yeah, it tends to be more in the last paragraph looking at the overall, but you can also analyze or evaluate the strategies. So I'll get into the structure in a second though. So that's a good question though. So I'll remember to answer that. So we've identified the main writing tasks. So any questions so far on the writing tasks?
Oh no, that's interesting now.
Yeah, it seems like a lot, but don't worry, we're going to keep going through to show you how you can tackle this prompt. So let me present this again. So we kind of talked about some of this, but strategies are tools within the text. So the example I gave you was metaphor. Can anyone think of any other strategies that authors might use to convince their audience?
Anecdotes.
Anecdotes, right? Little personal stories that they might use that. Definitely. And what do you think what's effective about anecdotes, do you think?
It brings your kind of like a human experience to and like sympathetic or empathetic tone to the work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so telling personal connections about yourself can work, but it might depend on the audience. If you're, you know, pitching to NASA about a space program, you might want to be leaning a little bit more on your hard facts than your anecdotes. But if you're writing an article for the New York Times, then you might want to use more stories. So these things, you know, may work really well in some situations, and then in others may not work as well. But anecdotes are definitely a good strategy to be looking for. And I know I used metaphor and we have anecdote, but these could even be just using scholarly evidence. using evidence, statistics. So it doesn't have to be a fancy name for when you're identifying the strategy. It can literally be like, he uses numbers, right? Numbers have a profound impact on how we understand things. If you tell me 100 million people are affected by this and you give me some studies, I'm probably going to be pretty convinced. So don't feel like it has to be something you learned, you know, about like, you know, it doesn't have to be as fancy name is what I'm getting at. It can be very, just get to the basics of the text. Assumptions are those unstated beliefs about the argument. So I mentioned the comedian, you know, that's a good way to see like if the jokes are gonna hit or not. This also comes up a lot in politics, right? So if I'm reading a liberal or a conservative news media piece, it's safe to say that the writer of that piece assumed that the readers are going to have a certain political leaning, right? So a lot of conservative or liberal press, you know, they're not going to be catering to the Republicans or the, you know, they're going to cater to who they connect with. So that's another way that I think it's easy to talk about assumptions is if I turn on CNN, the people who are talking on CNN probably assume that people that are watching kind of agree with certain things that they agree with. But if I had different beliefs, watching CNN wouldn't be as effective. Their pitches wouldn't be as effective. So we kind of talked about the tasks. You can identify, just means to name something, give it a name, numbers, metaphor, whatever makes most sense. Analyze, you want to discuss what's going on with that strategy using your own perspective. And then evaluate means to decide how persuasive it was. So those are the main writing tasks. So I'll take a second, slow down for a second. Does anyone have any questions or comments they want to add about the prompt? Okay, well, you all have brought up some good stuff already, so I'll keep on going. So I'm going to pull up the sample reading from the handout, and I want you to give it a quick read and try to figure out the author's argument, 2 persuasive strategies. And there's so many strategies in a text, like there's so many. So trust me, there's anything you find is if it's pulling you, then you should write about it. Don't second guess yourself. And then you want to try to see if you can figure out an assumption. So I won't have this screen up, so just to remember the 3 things: argument, strategies, assumption. So we'll do a quick activity on that. Let me pull up the prompt, or I mean the reading. Okay.
How much minutes is the class? 10 minutes.
Okay, so here's a short reading. This is actually a reading that was used in the WPA. It says e-cigs are a risk to everyone, not just the user. And it was published in the Daily Aztec, which is SDSU's newspaper. So I'll try to, let me zoom in if I can. And I'll try to, is that readable? Can you read?
Yes.
And I'll scroll down towards the end, but just we'll take 5 minutes to look over this. I'm going to scroll down just a little so you can see the end of the article. And just trying to understand, what is the author trying to argue? What is their main point? And then how are they trying to communicate that? Are they using anecdotes, personal stories, evidence?
Okay, what's the question?
So I'm asking you all to think about what the author's argument is. See if you can find
about
strategies.
Yeah, he gave us a clear explanation about personal experience, how it's dangerous is to hurt yourself and the other if you keep smoke.
Yes, definitely. So you've identified a strategy. They're using personal experience, and you've identified that argument. They're making a claim about secondhand smoke and if smoking should be allowed in certain places. So does anyone else want to add on to that? Could be what you noticed.
I guess kind of like talking about the harmful chemicals that are inside the e-cigarettes and kind of what they do, I imagine. So there's like scientific evidence as well, I think, behind it. So
Yeah, definitely. Which paragraph are you seeing that in?
the second to last, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, formaldehyde and nickel.
What kind of like thoughts does that bring up when we hear those kinds of words?
Yeah, I like that the author, he tried to find a solution to keep smoking, but he said the truth about how it's dangerous too. It's harmful.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was so true when he gave us all of this information in his essay.
Yeah, very good. I think, how does it feel when this person also smoked? Does that make their argument more or less credible?
I think it's more credible, mostly. As they were talking about how they were directly affected from these dangerous chemicals within the e-cigarettes. I think that kind of is an appeal to authority, but still but I still think that it's a useful tool in regards to this piece.
Yeah, very good. That sometimes admitting, I smoke too, like that's really adding to their character, right? You're going to believe this person more than maybe someone who's, on their high horse saying, don't smoke, this guy's like, hey, this person's like, I came from that too. And then someone added in on the chat, I like how his personal experience came full circle and how he mentioned it's his right to smoke in the beginning and how he ended it with everyone having equal access to smoke-free areas. Yeah, very good. That they're really trying to look at rights, like it's like my right to have this, and that we should not have to face having that risk, and maybe that right outweighs this right to smoke, right? That might be their overall argument. My right to a smoke-free education, right? This also kind of changes the argument. It's not just any public place. This is where I go to school. So they're making a pretty strong argument here about their right to a healthy, non-toxic environment to get their education in. So thank you very much for contributing that, Alyssa. Is there anything else anything else you noticed that you want to add on here?
Yeah, about the writing, in one sentence by itself, he said, I was only 33 years old at that time. He keep it in one line. So should we in the writing just jump between the paragraphs, or we can make a strong sentence stay by itself?
In general, like in your writing?
Yeah, yes, like if I want to write something or give attention to the readers about, or make it a big point, or surprise them. I have no idea, but one sentence alone, you know, I'm in the ILAC class and they don't let us to write like this, you know, they keep letting us to move on in the paragraphs.
That's a really good point. And I think that this really comes down to genre. So the genre of this piece is an article in a newspaper. So articles have like a lot more flexibility with their writing than like an academic essay.
I thought it's academic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a formal article. It was published in the newspaper, but it's the student newspaper. And in general, if you look up, you know, like a New York Times opinion editorial, you know, they're gonna have writing like this because it's more stylistic. It's more casual in a sense, whereas academic essays are very structured. So in some cases, if you are writing on your blog or for an article, this would be a great way to write. For your essays, it might not work as well because of the genre.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and I just want to mention briefly that I had a 40-minute cap on this meeting for some reason, so it will kick you out in a couple minutes, but just click the link again and come back right back. So we still have a couple minutes until it does that, but I just didn't want anyone to be alarmed. I'll still be in here and we'll continue our workshop. But we're just going to keep moseying along until that happens. So let me go back to my presentation. So we've looked at the author's argument. She's talking about, you know, having her right to a smoke-free environment. So in your intro paragraph of the WPA, you'd want to just get to the chase, right? This article by this person is arguing for a smoke-free environment at school and banning e-cigarettes. So that would just be identifying the author's argument, right? That's what they're arguing. Then since it's the intro, you might want to kind of preview what 2 strategies you're going to talk about. It's important to note that it says 2 strategies, and that's really as many as you want to do because you want to fully explain the strategy. You don't want to just, you know, bounce off a bunch of different things the author does because you won't have room to explain them. So we talked about personal experience. So maybe in your intro, after you explain the author's argument, you could say 2 strategies that this author uses are their personal experience and scientific facts about smoking. So those would be your 2 strategies, and you're going to have plenty to talk about in regards to those. And we'll get to assumptions later. That's a little less important than the strategies. So we're gonna look at the WPA website when we get back, but these are things you can do once you're preparing for the WPA. They have sample readings and sample scored essays that explain why they got the score they did. So that's really helpful if you're looking at, well, what makes an 8 different than a 6? They give examples for that. And then you can practice identifying strategies and assumptions in your daily life. When you're reading for homework, what sort of strategies are you seeing? What assumptions do you see when you're watching the news? So that can kind of help refine your ability to analyze these texts. So first of all, what comes to mind, or how would you maybe think about structuring this essay? Maybe I'll let you all take a minute. If you were going to write this essay, I'm going to pull up the prompt again. Think about what would your outline be. So we've mentioned a couple of strategies we could use. And so I want us to sort of think about, well, now that we kind of know what the WPA is asking us about, how could we structure this? So I'll pull up the prompt, and then I'm going to give you a minute to take a look and think about how you outline it. So we know we would have our intros. Maybe think about what would go in the intro. What would be the first body paragraph? And where are you going to be tackling these tasks that are in the prompt?
Excuse me, I didn't hear what did you say because I lost the connection.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm just giving everyone a minute to think about how would you outline this essay? What would be in your intro? You know, what would your first body paragraph be about? Like, think about if you were about to write this essay on the article that we just read. Let me find it. This article. How would you outline it? So you can just take a minute on a piece of paper and just kind of brainstorm how you would address the prompt. So I'll give everyone one more minute and then we'll come together and have a couple people share. And if you notice strategies in the reading, think about which two strategies would you want to use from that reading we just looked at. I will scroll back down to the reading. Okay, is anyone ready to share some of their thoughts?
Sure. So I think that the intro would be like the thesis or like the main argument that the writer is trying to present, claim. And then I would think that the first or the paragraph following it would be like two body paragraphs with the first paragraph being his personal experience, and then the second body paragraph being the scientific knowledge and facts, and then the conclusion on kind of reinforcing his argument and why his solution would work. So like banning public smoking areas and all that on campus.
Okay, awesome. So let me just get this down really quick. Second strategy, that was the scientific info. And remember, folks, that we just randomly chose two strategies, personal experience and scientific info. Those were not the only strategies by a long shot. So you just fill in whatever you would have put. So, and then you said the conclusion would be like discussing if this was a good solution or not? Okay.
And his personal opinion.
Sorry, say that again?
He disagree with that, so he show us that his opinion about this bad habit.
You think the author is disagreeing with this?
In the end, in the conclusion, he showed that.
Yeah, you're going to want to put some of your experience, or not your experience, but your perspective, what you believe the argument is about, or if it's effective. So I'm actually going to change this to say discussing if it was an effective article. It's not so much about do I agree with the solution. It's more about, regardless, maybe you think that smoking should still be legal in restaurants. Let's say that that's your take. You don't have to agree with the author, but you have to recognize, did they do a pretty good job, and how so, in communicating that, right? So just that's, I think, the biggest kind of warning I want to put on this assessment is you look at this beautiful structure we just came up with, and I want to shout out to Alyssa. I did incorporate some of what you put in the chat into our intro and explain the author's argument and kind of combine that with other stuff we were talking about. But look at what you'd be addressing in this essay. you're talking about strategies. You're not going to be talking about the pros and cons of smoking. That's not what your essay's about, right? You're talking about the strategies that the author's using. So your conclusion should match that, right? You don't want to go into, and I agree, smoking should be banned everywhere, because that's not what your essay was about. You'd want to end with, this article or this author was effective and or ineffective in communicating their point because. So that's kind of where you want to end. I'm going to show you all some examples really quick on the WPA website that will show us kind of the structure. Let me just pull that up really quick. Okay. So this is, for those of you that are planning on taking the test, this is a very valuable website. They have a ton of information on here. They have kind of an explanation of what we've talked about already. What is the WPA? How can you prepare? They have videos, reading samples, because again, remember that the prompt is always the same. The prompt I showed you about identifying strategies, always the same. The reading will be different, right? Because otherwise you could look up what other people said about the article. So I think if you go under understanding the test, by the way, the website is wpa.sdsu.edu. If you go to understanding the test, there's the scoring criteria and the scored essays and comments. So this I'm going to point out just to see how people structured their essay. So I'm going to take the essay with an 8 because, again, that's what we're shooting for. That's our goal. We're not too worried about the 10. So this one, I know it's a bit of a long essay, so I'm not going to ask you to read it all. But this essay is about an article called No More Curtain Call for Elephants. So it's about how elephants should be protected from traveling shows and exhibitions. So that's what this article was about. The topic sentence of the first body paragraph is kind of explaining or starting to hint at what the author will talk about in that paragraph. So I didn't get a chance to really talk about pathos, ethos, and logos, but really what that means is logic, feelings, emotions, and credibility. Those are the 3 ways we tend to be persuaded. If you watch those really sad commercials with puppies that are, you know, like donate to us, like, you know, that's an emotional appeal, right? They're not saying, they're not giving you a statistic of 97% of puppies, you know, they're just making you feel sad, right? And that might convince you. And so this writer is going to be talking about appeals to emotion in this piece. So they say that the measure should be passed because elephants in traveling shows are mistreated. By explaining to the reader the harsh living conditions and abuse these animals face, the authors seek to stir up empathy in the reader. So notice that they're not saying, this is correct, elephants are mistreated. They are saying the author is trying to make us feel empathy. And I want to point out, for those of you especially who are here for just general writing advice, this is a specific type of paper. This is called a rhetorical analysis, and it's where you're analyzing the persuasiveness of an article. But it has the key features of writing, right? We have our intro that's telling us what we're going to do, has our topic sentence that tells us what this paragraph is and how it connects to the intro, and that's what they do throughout. So for those of you who aren't looking at this for the WPA, remember that this is a specific genre of paper and that not all papers are going to be analyzing emotions in articles, right? It depends on the prompt. So they, I'll go back into this paragraph. They kind of explain why this would cause us empathy. The thought of a gentle giant being struck with a sharp object and chained in a cage while standing on concrete surfaces causes the reader, notice not me in general, just the reader, to feel for these elephants and agree with the argument to pass the measure. The use of pathos, or emotion, furthers the argument made by the board because it explains why the measure is needed by elephants in these conditions. And then they give an example from the text. This can be very helpful because you want to show, here's where the strategy happens. An example of an emotional appeal made in the article is seen when they state, for 8,000 to 10,000 pound creatures who spend all day on their feet and can live into their 40s, the consequence of that confinement was a painful middle age marked by arthritis, cracked toenails, and sore feet. And then they end with a concluding sentence. This explanation helps the reader understand why a measure was created to prohibit the use of elephants as entertainment and why it should be passed. So I'm going to take a second. I'm going to stop talking. I want you to look at just this one paragraph and notice, what are the moves being made? What are the steps the author, the writer had to take to complete this paragraph? Okay, what are people noticing? Anything that stands out? I notice we have our topic sentence, right? That's telling us how the paragraph is going to connect to their overall argument. What happens after that?
He explain and give us evidence then.
Yeah, very good. They kind of go into a little bit more detail. They are not just talking about emotion in general, they're especially talking about the harsh living conditions. That's kind of the part of the article they're focusing the most on. And they explain how it's going to affect the reader. If I'm reading this about elephants, it's going to make me feel really sad. Then they give me the exact example from the text. And I kind of top it off with kind of a concluding sentence and, transitioning out. So from this paragraph, do you think that the writer of this essay, do you think they think that the article was effective?
Yes.
Yep.
What makes you think that?
It is effective. He used a good strategy by add all of this information with good organization. I'm still reading actually.
No worry. I know it's a lot of text on the page. I wish I could just zoom in on
He
this
gives
one
us
part.
many examples. Some of them he used the reality scientific facts, used facts, and he used emotional examples as well. So
yeah. So the person who wrote this, sorry, Noah, did you have something to add?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
I think he showed us how much he cared about elephants.
Yeah, so
He made a study about their miserable life. I'm sorry for that.
no, those are good thoughts. The person who wrote this essay includes good examples, and we can tell that they think that the article's effective because they're making very positive statements about the article, right? This explanation helps the reader understand. So these are moments where there is that evaluation that comes in. We identify, this is the identification, right? This is what I'm going to talk about. This is the strategy I'm going to talk about. Well, I guess it kind of goes all the way up to here in terms of identifying. Then we have our analysis and explanation. We have some evidence. And then at the very end, there's a tiny bit of evaluation, right? They kind of say, yeah, this was a good move. Good job, author. You should have done that. So sometimes you might touch on each part of the prompt in each paragraph. They do the same in the next paragraph. Sorry, what?
He did that in each paragraph?
Touches on a little bit, right? So we have in the next paragraph, there's a topic sentence. There's going to be some explanation and analysis.
Snapchat.
Example.
And then at the end, they're going to do a little bit of evaluation. So in each paragraph, you'll probably touch a little bit on all of these moments. But it'll be kind of up to you how in depth you go into that. So I want to take a pause here and open it up for any questions. If you want to look at this essay, ask any questions about this essay. Any questions that have come up so far?
I don't know about this essay particularly, but I was just kind of curious about the WPA in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many of these like pieces do we have to read, and like how much time do we have?
That is a great question. So the WPA for SDSU is 2 hours.
I don't understand why God.
Sorry, what?
Why is this so?
I cannot hear the person that's asking the question, so maybe you could drop in the chat while I finish answering Noah's question. But you believe you have 2 hours, and you will only be reading one article. So it changes. It's almost always very overtly persuasive. You can tell that this article that this student wrote about is a persuasive article, right? Someone's arguing about elephants and how we should treat them. So it'll always be a very obviously argumentative article. You'll only have one article, and you'll have 2 hours.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And then, is there a certain length it should be? No, I think that you want to make sure, I think the biggest thing is that you want to make sure you fully answer the questions on the prompt. So if you don't explain the author's argument, like that's kind of a problem. That's going to make your other paragraphs harder. As long as you can, you know, generally introduce the topic. It doesn't need to be like a mind-blowing introduction. I know in a lot of classes we worry about hooks, bringing the reader in, that you have 2 hours. You know, you're not expected to like make magic happen. You're just expected to be able to talk about an article in a way that shows you can analyze it. So the length isn't as important as the content. And there's a lot of 8s that are really short. They can be shorter. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that people who get 8s, it's almost up to 60% of people get 8s. Like a lot of people, it's a big category. There's a lot of different looks to an 8. Very much smaller amount of people get 6s, and even smaller than that get 10s. So if you land in the 8 category, you're in good company. Okay, any other questions? I'm just gonna, as the end here, I just wanna again show you guys this website. It's really helpful. They have reading samples, so something you could even do is, here's the elephant article. You could come in, read an article, and write a practice essay. You could just try it. Like if you were gonna write about this article, how would you do it? So if you are gonna take the WPA, I think that's a great idea, just try it. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you're having trouble thinking of strategies, I wouldn't spend too much time on this because there's so many, and a lot of them have really dumb names. Don't worry about that. But you could like look up strategies if you're having a hard time understanding what that is. The last thing I'll say is I know that it's a really weird time, and I hope that everyone's transferring goes smoothly. And so I appreciate you all for being here with me today. And I also believe the WPA might be postponed because it's an in-person situation. So I would keep tabs on that and go to that website, maybe see if you can find an email to get in touch. But from what I've heard, it's postponed for now. I'm assuming at some point it will need to be taken, because even though some of you are transferring, students who started at freshman level at SDSU, they have to take it when they're juniors. So you're not the only ones taking it. Everyone at SDSU has to take it as like a graduate requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much. It was really nice discussing this with you, and I wish you all the best of luck in transferring.
Thank you. Thank you, Bree.
again.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Yeah, and also I'm gonna drop the link in the chat really quick in case no one got to sign in, and just try to sign in one more time. But yeah, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you. I will try to sign in again on this